On this week's podcast, I'd like to talk with you about the word indifferent. Indifferent. If you're indifferent to someone and their needs, it's like, I don't care. I don't care. I have a problem when in our country we are indifferent to others, when we try to treat them differently, or we don't think some people are deserving of care and love. Just from a human point of view, I have a problem with that. You can't be uncaring for other people. You just can't. It's just not human to be that way. Now, I have an even greater problem when there are people who profess to be Christian. And to be clear, being Christian is not by being born into a Christian family or being born into a Christian community. Being Christian is when you have decided that you want to follow the life and teachings of Jesus. Remember, Jesus came because he had to clarify what following God was all about, because the people got it wrong. They thought, well, you have all these rules, you follow these rules, you're good. You don't follow the rules, you're bad. Jesus came to say that it's not about following rules. It's about loving God and loving other people and changing the world by loving others. So someone who claims to be a Christian, meaning they choose to follow the life and lessons of Jesus, which were to love people, how can you discard some people? How can you be mean and cruel to some people? Well, you just can't. That's kind of the point. And when your political organizations then say, we don't like these people, we want to get rid of them, much like Hitler did with the people that he didn't want, we're going to extinguish these people and get rid of them. They're not worthy of anything. We don't want them anywhere around us. And so when we have political structures that are trying to do the same thing to groups of people, that is just completely antithetical to being a human being, much less being a person with any religious or moral integrity. It just does not make any sense. So, in thinking about this podcast on being indifferent, a lot of the scriptures I wanted to use, I actually used in my book. Sometimes you have to stir the pot, and I actually have a chapter on indifferent. And I wanted to open with a scripture from Ezekiel, and I quoted it right here in the book. And so I'm going to follow along quite a bit with the section here on indifferent from my book. Sometimes you have to stir the pot. For my weekly podcast that I'm doing on the beginning of every week, a lot of those topics that I have outlined for this year are also topics that I've written on, but I've just had conversations with you. But when it comes to this particular topic, the meat of it, the scriptures I wanted to use, I actually quoted and put in here and then have my own commentary. So I don't normally just kind of read to you on this podcast, but I do want to lay some groundwork that I've really already written about, and then I want to have a conversation with you. Okay, so if you have this book, the chapter on indifferent starts on page 25, and this is for this is a 52-week study the way I did this. So if you actually read this in this way, this would be on week 8. Indifferent. Ezekiel 16, verse 49. This was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride, excess of food, and prosperous ease, but did not aid in the poor and needy. They had become haughty, indifferent, and uncaring for others. It's kind of interesting, even all the way till today, people, when they talk about Sodom and Gomorrah, they want to talk about gay sex. Even in Ezekiel's time, he said, wait a second, people, you're talking about Sodom and Gomorrah by something that's not even true. The sin of Sodom and Gomorrah was that they were inhospitable. They did not want strangers in their land. And when they saw that Lot had these two men visiting him and he showed hospitality, invited them in, the town came out and said, no, we don't want strangers coming in here, because as soon as you get some stranger, then more want to come and then they're going to occupy our resources. No, we can't have that. And so what they wanted to do was, okay, send them out here so we can rape them, because then they'll go back where they came from and said, oh my goodness, you won't believe what happened. All these men raped me because I was there. And so then they won't want to come back. So how do we rape people today? By keeping them away? Well, about 6-7 years ago, when people crossed our borders, we took their children away from them, put them in cages, didn't keep good records. So these people never got the kids back. So if they made it back to their own village or to new villages, they shared people. You won't believe what happened to us. The American authorities took our children away, and we have no idea where they are. So that's how we have become sodomites in this country in the things we do. We want to hurt people so bad that they will share their stories, and that will stop people from wanting to come, because they know if they come here, we're going to rape them. In this case, metaphorical rape, by stealing their children. So, and even today, people want to talk about Sodom and Gomorrah, and they're talking about it's about gay sex. No, it wasn't about gay sex. It was about being cruel to people, raping them, hurting them, destroying them, so they would have stories to tell, so nobody else would want to come to our place, because we don't want foreigners here. So, while in this chapter on indifference, I also go through the scriptures from First Peter, from Matthew 25. Very, very interesting. And then also Romans 12:20, where it says, if your enemies are hungry, feed them. If they're thirsty, give them something to drink. So enemies. So not just not just your neighbors, but your enemies. Anybody. People you don't like. Strangers that are in your land. It's interesting that I actually already had this topic scheduled for this week. And this past Sunday, at my early service I attend at 8:30, Chapelwood United Methodist Church, Pastor John actually used these same scriptures in his sermon on Sunday. So I will put the link in here on the message, so that if you want, you can go see it. Go to the Chapelwood United Methodist Church YouTube channel, and there are links for all three of the services in the main sanctuary. There's an 8:30 service. That's the one I go to. The 9:45 service, and there's an 11:15 service that has more traditional music. I was there for the 8:30 service. I did actually uh, go onto YouTube and watch the sermon part of the 11:15 service. The 8:30 service tends to be a smaller crowd, well, very small crowd actually, and the sermon tends to be more conversational. The 11:15 sermon, although it's the same content, there seems to be a more formal energy in the presentation from Pastor John. I'm not saying one is good and one is bad. I'm just saying they're different in that way. 8:30 is more conversational. 11:15 is more formal, but yet not formal. There have been times before where I'll watch the service and then I'm curious. Okay, this is how he said that with us at 8:30. I wonder how he will say that same thing 11:15. And there are times where I watch it. There have been services where I watch the other two services where I've heard the same sermon three different times to three different conversations. And there are subtle differences, but the meat's the same. But I will say, so the sermon that I'm referencing at this moment was from this past Sunday, and um, um, by the time I'm using my content here on my podcast, it's 1, 2, or 3 weeks later. So I will put the link in there and talk about what date that was. I am recording. I don't even know what day it is today, but um, I will put in the link what Sunday that was. I'm in my house now on Tuesday, filming content for. I think this is for next Monday, and so when you watch this next Monday, it will not be the Sunday that just happened, but the week before the service. So anyway, it's interesting that Pastor John used these same scriptures in here. That's in my chapter I wrote on indifferent, which was the planned topic for this particular week's podcast. 1 Peter 4, 8 through 10. Above all, maintain constant love for one another, for love covers a multitude of sins. Be hospitable to one another without complaining. Like good stewards of the manifold grace of God, serve one another with whatever gift each of you has received. And Pastor John talked about, we all have unique gifts that we have uh, to serve and to minister to each other, and that's important. At the time I wrote this, and I think this particular uh, essay on indifference was something I wrote around 2017. And so, following that scripture, I wrote, as Christians, we are called to help others. Helping others is a part of showing love. Parallel to this is a call to make sure that our actions do not harm others. When people that call themselves Christians cause the harm of others, then they have created problems that are antithetical to Christianity. Matthew 25:34-40. It talks about that's the story of um, whatever you have done to the least of these, God is saying that's like you did it to me. So if you took care of someone who was hungry or thirsty, then that's like God is saying that's like you're doing that to me. And uh, uh, and as the flip of that story goes, God will tell someone who's at the end of their life seeking to walk into heaven and say, wait a second, you didn't take care of me. I was hungry, you didn't give me anything. I was thirsty, you didn't give me anything. I needed medical care, and you did not allow me to receive that. In fact, you voted for people that made it impossible for me to get medical care. You voted for people that took away resources to help poor people. So I'm sorry. And they'll say, wait, God, we didn't do that to you. Or they'll say, wait, God, I didn't do that. The president and his leaders did that for a spell, but I didn't do that. And said, well, didn't you vote for them? Yes. Didn't you watch the news? You heard what they said they were going to do? Yes. So you're surprised because they did what they said they were going to do? No. Whatever you did not do, or the things you did that hurt others, that's like you did it to me. How much clearer can that be? Pastor John doesn't often give concrete real life examples, but he did Sunday. And he talked about immigrants, and he talked about having gay family members and how we treat them. And then he said, now, I'm not being political. I'm just using the Bible, and I'm doing what I know Jesus told us we're supposed to do. So, doing what God calls you to do, following the life and lessons of Jesus, is not being political. It's just doing what it is that you're supposed to do. So that was kind of the gist of his message. I tend to be a very critical person, perhaps too critical, and I can pick something apart. One thing did happen that didn't really sit well with me, but I always look at intent, pure hands and a clean heart. And if those things are going on, then I know the intent was correct and harm wasn't meant to be done. But one thing was said that I take a little offense to. I don't think it was intentional. I think it's indicative of the world we live in at this moment. Um, the pastor in his sermon was sharing the story of a man who was giving advice to a lady that said that her grandson was getting married. In the story, he told of a minister at a radio show and everything, who had a caller who called in and said that she had a grandson who was getting married to a man, and she didn't feel she should go to the wedding. And the minister on the call-in show said, well, that would not be correct. If you're following the life and lessons of Jesus, you go to that wedding because you're showing love as Jesus would show love. And the story goes that the man lost his radio show because he said that. Now, so that what this man said would be more valuable, the pastor said, and he introduced this man as a conservative Christian minister who had a radio show. And so this conservative Christian man told this lady she should go to her grandson's. And here's the problem I had with that. We're to the place in our society where some people believe that to be conservative means you're better than other people. And so that this man telling this woman to go to her grandson's wedding would be elevated to something that's of value, we have to know that a conservative Christian man said this, because that's somehow better than someone else following the life and lessons of Jesus. So I had a little issue with that. And as soon as it was said and then the story came out, I'm thinking like, this isn't quite right. And I listened to the 11:15 service and that came out as well. But, read the room. I'm looking around the church, reading the room, and it's like, yeah, there are people there that the fact that this came from a conservative Christian man means it was better than if it came from someone who is a Christian minister who was not conservative. And that really just really sticks in my craw. But I mean, that's not just the perception. That's the reality of the world we live in. That in many Christian circles, being a conservative Christian is better than not being a conservative Christian, and that's just simply not true. In fact, I'm to the place where someone tells me someone is a conservative, I'm immediately turned off because I see the actions of other people who call themselves conservative Christians. So, uh, uh, what may have been stated in that sermon, sharing the story of the man who lost his radio job because he told a woman that if she's truly following the life of Jesus, she's going to go to her grandson's wedding, even though he's marrying another man. Um, so I do understand that, there were probably people there in the sanctuary that when he said this was a conservative Christian man with conservative values like we have, and he said and I'm thinking like, yeah, that probably made it better for them. They said, oh, this is a very, very famous liberal Christian pastor who believes that we need to feed the hungry and make sure people have enough to drink, make sure people have health care, make sure their children have food, make sure they have safe places to go to school. Oh, wait, is that what we're against? Uh, there's another thing. This isn't about this service, but there's another thing that quite often occurs when I hear people talking about we need to love and care for the immigrants because the Bible tells us to. We need to love all people. It doesn't matter if they're gay, it doesn't matter if they're transgender. Why? Because Jesus modeled that and the Bible tells us to. I don't know why it is, but when I hear those two conversations specifically, and I'm going to call them three conversations because I'm going to pull transgender off as a whole separate thing because transgender people have become the punching bag of the LGBTQ community, and make no mistake, they're the low hanging fruit. We're going to kick them off, and then we'll work on the others. We can't attack them all at once, so we're going to pull off the transgender folk first, and then we're going to go after all of them. Don't be mistaken. That is the plan. And you just wait it out. If people don't rise up and stop this lunacy, that's exactly where it's going. Okay, back on time. I'm getting fired up today. I didn't know I was going to get so fired up, but I am fired up because this is important to me. Don't get me wrong. Uh, the message that was given at church was good. There probably will be fewer people this next Sunday. There might be some people who left because of that message. If they don't want to follow the life and teachings of Jesus, then they need to stop pretending they don't need to be there. That's a good thing. So the other thing that bothers me is, besides having to preface everything as conservative to make it more valuable to hear in church, that really irritates me because what I see from people that call themselves conservative Christians, you tell me someone's a conservative Christian, I'm immediately turned off. I don't want any part of them because I see how others who call themselves conservative Christians and what they do. The other word is traditional. I've heard people speak, and before they want to give anything affirmational about LGBTQ people, they have to say, well, wait a second. I need to let you know that I am a traditionalist. And then they tell us that we need to love gay people. As if you didn't say you were a traditionalist, nobody's going to listen to you because you're not traditionalist. So being traditionalist somehow elevates you. Is there a hierarchy that being a traditionalist is better than not being a traditionalist? Just like being conservative is better than not being conservative? How all that mess got mixed up in church world, I just don't get it. I don't get it. I don't get it. I don't understand how that has happened, because that's antithetical to everything that Jesus came to teach us. Because people said all this stuff was about God that wasn't, and here we are. We're doing the same thing, people. Are you awake? We're doing the same thing. We're pushing Jesus out of the way so we can say things about God, putting God in this little box over here, because Jesus is over here, and Jesus doesn't even fit in the box that we're calling conservative Christianity. Traditionalist. Jesus was not a traditionalist. Jesus was not a conservative. Period. That's the truth. And don't be surprised when I agree with myself, because I believe I'm right. If I didn't think I was right, I'd change my mind and fix it. But I'm right on this. I'm right on this. I'm right on this. Okay. Are we unconcerned about others? Are we not even willing to think about them and the possibility of their needs? Do we not even care about their needs because it's much more important for us that we increase our wealth and our riches and our status, that we're not even concerned for others? That's wrong. That's wrong. And voting for people and putting them in leadership in an office that believe in hurting people in order to make the richer richer and the poorer poorer, and taking away the safety net of resources and health care for people, taking away their food, taking away free lunches at school, taking money away from the public schools so that rich people can use that money that we steal away from school tax dollars so they can pay for their private schools that discriminate. That's wrong. That's wrong. And you know what? You know it's wrong. Anyone who says they're a Christian knows that's wrong. You know it's wrong. You know the political leadership in our country here in February 2025, you know they're doing wrong. Perhaps some of you are listening to this and you voted for this administration 3 times. They won once, they lost twice, and then lied and said, oh, they really won, they stole it from us. No, didn't happen. And then won the 3rd time. I'm convinced that the reason we're in this situation is because there are people living in our country that refuse to vote for a black person. And there are people living in our country that refuse to vote for a female to be the leader. I'm convinced that's the root of why we are where we are. It's not about the price of eggs, not about the price of gas. It's not about the war in Ukraine. It's not about the war in Gaza. There are some people that no matter what would not vote for a female president. And there's some people, no matter what, will not vote for a black president. And so when you take away the people that will never vote for a black person, and then you add to that the people that would never vote for a female president, we are where we are. So no matter what, if you say you want to follow the life and teachings of Jesus, that's the only way you get to call yourself a Christian. Because any of that other mess is not Christianity. And stop saying it is, because it just is not so. I'll put the link on here for Pastor John's message. It was right on point. I appreciated it. I shared a few tears there at the end of the service with some of the things he said. Um, Actually had a conversation with a lady in the church between church and Sunday school. I go to the 8:30 service and then Sunday school at 10. And then I try to go to another church where I serve as the director of senior adults. I try to get, it starts at 11. I try to get there by 11:15. But I had more conversation with this lady after Sunday school, which made it impossible for me to get to the other service, which that is fine because I believe I was where I was supposed to be in that moment. But I had a conversation with a lady who shared with me that her sister's grandson is gay and that they were having a hard time with that. I understand having a hard time with that. When you're encountering something that you've been bombarded in your world and in your church and in your political arena that says there's something wrong with these people. We need to kill them. Don't let them in your house. If we kill them off, we'll be okay. You know, one thing that we don't often talk about and remember is that the Nazis didn't just have concentration camps for the Jews. Going back in time when I used to teach social studies to sixth graders, we would get to the period of World War II and we'd be reading in our textbook. And at the very top of the page, there was just like a few sentences that said the Nazis wanted to exterminate the Jews and others and put them in concentration camps where many of them were gassed to death in gas chambers. And when I would get to that part of instruction, the day before the end of class, I would ask them, open to page, whatever the page was. And I said, read at the time. Do I have a volunteer I'd like to read? And, you know, kids would raise their hands. So I'd call and say, read the first paragraph on page. And they would read it. Good. So who else would like to read? I said, read the first paragraph on page. And I'd go and do around. So we had read it like 6 or 7 times. And then I'd just stare at the kids and they'd just stare back at me. And I'd say, why do you think I had you reread that paragraph? There's something very curious about that paragraph. I said, everybody read that paragraph silently to yourself. Read it over and over and over until you think you figured out what I am curious about in that paragraph. And eventually someone would I'd sit there for 5 minutes if I had to, because I wasn't going to say it. Because technically that wasn't part of our curriculum. In the state of Texas, even the textbooks that are used in schools have to pass committee. And so even what we have as history is edited history. Always has been, always will be. It's even worse now. I don't know what the newest textbooks are like. I've been retired now for 8 years. No, 9 years. And eventually a student would say, it said they try to get rid of the Jews and others. I said, that's what I'm curious about. I said, we've kind of been taught, even when I was in school, we were taught that the Germans and the Nazi Germans were trying to get rid of the Jews. They did not like the Jews. They wanted to get rid of them. But they were not the only people that they rounded up in concentration camps. They're not the only people that they gassed to death. There were other groups of people they wanted to get rid of too. And I said, our textbook says, and others. So since the textbook uses the word and others, I think it means that they want us to know who are the others. If they didn't want us to know about the others, they wouldn't write the word and others. I'm twisting things a little bit, but really, the textbook said "and others," and that passed by the textbook editors before it was approved for use in the state of Texas. And so I told him, says, your homework tonight is when you go home, use your phone, use the internet, ask people, whatever, find out who these others were. And for your homework tonight, I want one paragraph in your own words. Don't find something and write down a paragraph. I want you to find out stuff, then move away from your computer, sit down at a table, and write me a conversational paragraph telling me what you found out about who these others were. And so the kids would come in the next day, and I would collect those. And as is usual for sixth grade, about 70% of them would have actually done it, and some just didn't. And I would collect the papers and say, okay, now, what did you find out? And others. Our textbook says, and others. So we need to do the work to find out who is it our textbook is talking about. And then the kids would just, and someone they'd always come up with gypsies first, because the Nazis did not like the gypsies and they wanted to get rid of the gypsies as well. And then someone would say, homosexuals. I said, oh, really? And then someone would say, what's that? I said, well, that's the gay people. And really, they were talking about gay men. And I would just ask questions. Well, what did you find? Well, what did it say about them? What did they do? And some of them would have the name of the concentration camp and gas chamber where they collected all of the gay people and put them to death. So this whole idea of separating people, there's talk where part of our country and our political leaders want to reopen Guantanamo Bay and use that as a concentration camp. They're not using the word concentration camp, but that's what they use that as a concentration camp for people that they are saying are the immigrants they want to get rid of. This isn't new, people. So wake up, be awake, don't be asleep. Don't be asleep, be awake. Know what's going on. And if you really claim to be a follower of Jesus Christ, which is where the word Christian comes from, make sure your hands are clean and your heart is pure. You can't talk out of both sides of your face at the same time. This wasn't intended to be political. It turned political. It turned more political than was my intent. But based on this topic, Jesus calling us to love our neighbors, all of our neighbors, doesn't matter if it's your immigrants or if your neighbors are gay or if they're transgender. And don't forget your family, your neighbors too. It seems to be church people and people that call themselves Christians are most unkind to their family members that happen to be gay or transgender than they are to their neighbors, although they're not very nice to them either. Well, if you've engaged in this content, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you for watching.